Welcome to the workshop, Do Unto Others, Ethical Autoethnography, led by Dr. Jillian Tullis, who is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of San Diego, where she went there in 2015, going home to California after 6 busy and successful years at North Carolina, Charlotte. Jillian is the former president or chair, whatever you call it, for your discipline of the ethnography division of the National Communication Association, which is our discipline's communications largest organization. Her research focuses on a number of vital and challenging issues pertaining to health and communication, including but not limited to issues pertaining to end of life, what it means to end lives. I know she's been as a friend, very helpful to me just backstage in different family experiences, and I have to believe that I'm not alone in that. Dr. Tullis recently published a co-authored essay in the Journal of Medicine and the Person about the meaning of wanting everything done at the end of life. Her work on an American Cancer Society grant-funded project focusing on terminally ill head and neck cancer patients' perceptions of communication with their surgeons was published in Health Communication. It was a long sentence. She also has publications in qualitative research in medicine and healthcare, qualitative inquiry, Journal of Health Communication, the Handbook of Autoethnography, behavioral sciences, communication teacher, and the departures in critical qualitative research. My first engagement of Jillian's work is in a collaborative piece she did, and I think it stemmed from Carolyn's class, and it's a piece called Truth Troubles, which is a fun piece on ethics. And so it's funny, as we put this session together, we quickly thought of Jillian for any number of reasons. I think with ethics, it's an endless, tireless, but vital conversation. I think that it is ongoing. It is contested, right? But it's something that needs communicated. But there's just so many different stories. You know, everyone has a different story and a different approach to this topic of doing no harm. And again, on a personal note, I think having known you for a long time, Jillian, you are that person actually that I think so many people, if they're like me, go to, that kind of unwavering support. Even if just to listen, you know, and you're also fun too. And so I have permission to tell this story, and it's personal, but I'll be brief. I know Jillian is someone also who leaves at the very latest minute possible from conference, right, to get to the airport. Like she fits everything in. And if you know her, you know I'm understating it. It's like the perfect, she slides in and out, right? Slides. And the story that I'm telling here is a recent one in November in New Orleans. Jillian always wants to fit in that last interaction, that last hug, right? She slides in for a hug and then gets to the gate. And she wanted to know how NOLA's airport was. And I'd already been home for a day. And I said, yeah, I hear it's pretty messy. That was right before the holiday, right? And all that type of stuff. It's like, yeah, I really want to go to this drag show. I'm like, oh God, she's going to do it. Just making me nervous, right? And we go back and forth, but for 10 minutes or so. And then she's like, all right, I'll see. We'll see. I knew damn well what was coming. And then her flight was just in a couple hours. And I'd say, what, an hour, 45 minutes before the flight, I simply got a picture on my phone from text of the drag show. That, my friend, is sliding in and out.
I was already at the airport, in fairness.
What's that?
When I sent you that, I was already at the
Of
airport.
course. Right, but it was just perfect.
I did go to the drag show.
I know you did. And again, that's an inside story, but fun. And it speaks to the relationship and the friendship, and which I appreciate both. But I will pass this over to Dr. Tullis to lead us through this workshop and see what folks have to say, want to say about ethics. So thank you for doing this, Jillian. Can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Keith, and I want to welcome everyone. Before I kind of jump into our content for today, I just wanted to also take a moment to pause and do a land and labor acknowledgement. I'm here in San Diego, California, which is the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay people. It's one of about 26 federally recognized tribes in San Diego County. And I just want to kind of honor and recognize the kind of the ongoing relationship we have with that community. But of course, I also want to thank Keith and Tony for their encouragement with this particular session. I always want to say no, but I can't say no to them. So thank you. But I should also say, really thank you to Tony Adams, Stacy Holman Jones, and Carolyn Ellis, because they're the ones that got me into this work of doing and writing about and thinking about ethics for the handbook in particular way back in, I guess it would have probably been like 2012 or something like that. So thank you for introducing me and that project. Okay, so I want to just lay out the plan that I have. I'm going to see if I can actually share my screen with you. We're going to put it to the test here.
Hey, Jillian, I meant to ask an offer. Would
Yeah,
you like me to watch chat for you?
yeah, yeah, that would be great. I'm going to try to, do what I can to kind of monitor as
Sounds
we
good.
go. But of
Yeah.
course, if you see something jumping out, and I'm happy to take questions and so on
Okay.
as we go, that would be awesome. Okay, let me share my screen really quickly and see if we can get this going so you can see my plan. All right, so what I thought we would do to get us started is we're gonna do some introductions. So I'll introduce myself. I'll talk a little bit about my relationship to autoethnography and thinking about ethics. But I'm gonna also have you introduce yourselves to each other in some small groups unless people are opposed to that. And then we will talk a little bit about how I conceptualize ethics in autoethnography. We'll discuss some challenges. I'm hoping you'll bring some to the conversation. And then we'll explore some strategies. I have a plan for an application activity. And then if we have time, which I think we will for questions and answers, we'll do that. So that is my thinking for the moment. All right, let me exit out of this and get us going. Okay, so I always like to start by telling people that, I call myself a reluctant autoethnographer. My advisor's in the room, Carolyn Ellis, and I know that she tried with all of her might to get me to do more autoethnography. But I have, I have some anxieties about it, but I have done it, and I have published some of my own um, projects using the method. And so I'm not opposed to it. I'm definitely a fan. But as we go, you'll learn about how some of my reluctance is definitely related to the ethical kind of quandaries and conundrums that it raises. Um, but I will say that I have used it to study also very personal experiences like and I think everybody does, but I think they have also carried with them some particular burdens. For example, writing about the death of my ex-husband. When you are divorced from someone, that has its own challenges, but then to find out via text message that they have died is a particular challenge. So I'm definitely a fan, but I think about these issues pretty deeply, and I've worked with students who love and are passionate and fascinated by the method, and I also bring those concerns to the conversation that we're going to have today as well. What is it like to also try to advise students who want to engage with this particular work? So I say all of that to just say that I kind of ride this line. And my favorite type and what I think is the most kind of effective autoethnography, often for me, is autoethnography that has all of the conventions, the aesthetics of narrative life writing, but also has a connection to the literature. And I think we'll see as this workshop goes on, we'll see the ways in which that connection to the literature also might be one of the strategies that you might use to manage the kind of ethical challenges that you might be confronted with. Okay. Okay, so what with that information about me, and I'm happy to answer any other questions as we go if you have them. I thought what we would do is spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes in some breakout groups, and if you don't want to do this, you're welcome to, mute yourself, stay in the room here with me. But what I wanted to have you all do was share some information and maybe share some information with a small group, but then also share some information with me. So I'm going to tell you what that is right now. It would be great if you could share in your groups your name, what you prefer to be called. What do you study or what would you like to study using this particular method? So I realize that we may have a range of people, veteran, autoethnographers and novice autoethnographers. So what kinds of things would you like to study, or have you studied, or do you study using the method? And then if you have one question or issue around ethics, what is that? And you can discuss that in your small groups, but if you will send that to me in the chat, I will use that to inform some of our conversation. Just want to make sure I'm meeting people's expectations. So I have a plan, but I want to hear what your thoughts and issues are too. So 3 things: your name, how you use the method or want to use the method, and then also if you have a question or issue related to ethics. Okay, so I'm going to drop you into some breakout groups, really small groups, and I'm going to give you 10, 15 minutes. When you give me your question, I'm gonna work under the assumption that you're probably close to wrapping up, right? So when you send me your question in the chat, okay? If you would like to put in the chat your question or your issue or your concern, you're welcome to do that. If it's too personal and private and you just want it to come directly to me, you're welcome to just send it directly to me, and that's perfectly fine. Okay. Okay, so and what I'm going to be doing with these questions is I'm hoping chances are that I will address some of them as we go. But of course, if some of those issues or questions are not raised during our time together, then we'll have an opportunity to address them as we go as well. Okay. Okay, so I want to say one of the things that I was thinking about in doing this is I recognize that we have an international audience here and community, which is fabulous. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, I'm here in the United States, and we have our own particular challenges and issues that may be quite different than some of the ethical challenges and issues in other countries. We may have systems that are also different. So what I'm going to try to do in the kind of the next portion of the conversation today is just talk like very generally about ethical principles as opposed to what may be happening at our respective institutions. Of course, that will come up. We have here in the United States, we have an institutional review board. You've probably heard people talk about IRB. I realize that in other places, you may call it just like an ethics committee. And so there may be other terms that are used, but from what I can tell, and in some of the work that I've done, these principles are embraced at least in certain international contexts as well. So for example, the World Health Organization uses these same principles for studying human subjects, and those are the principles that are here used here in the US. So I want to talk a little bit about them, and I'm going to go back to my slideshow here, which it's really my least favorite piece of technology is a PowerPoint presentation, but we're going to use it because it'll be easier for you to see. So let me share my screen and bring up some of these principles that we're going to talk about so that you can see them in front of you. All right. Okay. All right. Can everyone see that? Is that visible? Let me see. Okay.
There we go. That's better.
Yeah. Is that better? Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Okay, our tech person warned me that could happen. So, all right, so here are some of the guiding principles that are used usually in research contexts. So you're going to have respect for persons. And in this case, oftentimes they're talking about how do we think about protecting people, especially those who have maybe limited autonomy or who are especially vulnerable, okay? You have beneficence, right, or non-malfeasance, you'll hear used sometimes. We're talking about things like how do we minimize risk, but I think sometimes we don't talk about how we maximize benefit quite as much. A lot of emphasis is placed on how do we minimize risks to participants, but way less about how we maximize benefits. It's almost like we don't talk about that, but it's also part of that principle. Justice is one. How do we pursue justice in the work that we do? And I think that oftentimes if we're thinking about maybe in methods outside of autoethnography, but you're thinking, who are your participants? Do you have representation that's diverse, right? As opposed, and are you allowing opportunities for people, all types of people, to participate in your work? You have informed consent. This is a topic we're definitely going to talk about as it relates to autoethnography. We have issues around confidentiality and how to protect data. And I just last night did our IRB, like our ethics refresher, and I was surprised how much was in this particular certification around protecting data. And maybe that's because we have new technology, things like the cloud, that also become a question. But I think this is an interesting question for maybe autoethnographers as it relates to things like, if you have a journal, do you have a paper and pen kind of journal, and how does that get protected? Should it get protected, et cetera? Integrity in the data. And I think this is also an interesting question for us to explore, because this is usually in the context of a lot of other methods talking about things like how do you avoid falsification or fabricating data. And for autoethnographers, sometimes we need fabrication. That's on our side, right? To be able to do things. Maybe fabrication is not even the word, but we need to sometimes be able to fictionalize something in order to protect ourselves and other people. And then conflict of interest. And again, we're going to see how these particular principles play out very differently in this particular method, because I don't know, maybe in all research we all have a vested interest, and maybe that creates a conflict. Like I want to get promoted, you probably want to get a job, right? Those are those conflicts of interest if we choose to write about ourselves. So these are some of the guiding principles that are, like, once again, used here in the United States. They're definitely, World Health Organization also uses these principles, and they come as a consequence of people who engaged in unethical research, right? And so on one hand, I honor them, I respect them, I think they can be very valuable, but I think when we try to do autoethnography, they get very, very messy, okay? Is it okay for me to, anybody still need this slide? And I'm happy to make my slides available to anyone, but if there's somebody that needs them, I don't want to go away from them too quickly. Okay, I'm gonna pause my share, stop my share here, come back to you. Okay. All right. So those are the principles that guide us, but I think there's a question, another question that is, I don't even want to say it out loud because it's that kind of messy, okay? There is a question about whether or not autoethnography counts as research. And for some people, if you say yes to that question, it means that you need to go through a particular series of steps and processes. And if you say no to that question, then are you free and clear of having to engage in certain types of ethical discussions, processes, systems, and so on? Okay? So what I mean is, if I say it's not research, and therefore I don't have to go through the IRB, what does that mean for all the other elements of the work that might come from this? Do I count it as scholarship towards job and tenure and promotion and so on, right? Or is it something else? And I think I want to just put that out there. I don't know if we want to discuss this. I think absolutely it is scholarship. Whether or not it is research for the purposes of like an IRB or an ethics committee is an entirely different question, right? It's an entirely different question, because my IRB might say to me, well, this is not research. There are no participants. You're not recruiting people. Right. But does that then absolve me of all those principles that I just talked about? Right. It's a tricky, territory. So I don't know. I don't, again, I won't, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but if there are people who have thoughts about it, if you want to jump in and give an example or an experience, I'm open to it.
I'm just going to jump in. In the UK, so I'm doing my DProf, and it most definitely, my institution most definitely counts it as research, and I had to go through full ethical approval. And actually, I got rebuffed the first time because I hadn't thought about my well-being as a researcher enough. So it wasn't that they wouldn't consider autoethnography, it's just they were concerned about my well-being and that I was aware of the issues that came with autoethnography. But it most definitely was classed as research for my institution.
That's really fascinating, and I'm glad to hear it. We're going to talk about that. What does this method mean for the person that is engaging in this type of work? And I'm glad to hear that's the best kind of question to get from your ethics committee, I think, is like, what about you in this? Because almost, I mean, even when I did a more normative, like traditional ethnography, I don't think the IRB asked me what it would mean to be at the bedside of dying people, and so I think that's a very, very interesting question and shows some sophistication maybe on the part of your ethics committee, which is great.
I could add and jump in.
Yeah, please.
So at USF currently, well, my personal opinion is that it's research, and it's research to an international, interdisciplinary community of scholars who see it as research, who have developed aims and scopes that pertain to the research and guide it, and a set of criteria for evaluation, right? There's work there. So there's an ethnographic sensibility, right? Is it research? Well, let's ask the community, right? Let's ask the people. At USF, it's been this way for a while, and not much has changed. It is not considered human subjects research. And that is due to a lack of the desire for generalizability. But however, most, if not all, probably all doctoral and some master's students who are doing an autoethnography based project of late still put in for exemption. So that's the current guidance, that you still put in for an official determination of exemption, which also has a secondary purpose of having that if you go on to want to publish that, so you don't, for example, get a desk reject, right, outright, because you don't have IRB approval. Right. I should say that too, that almost all the projects at USF, I'm going to focus on dissertations, all entail not only the inward introspective work, but also some type of external process, typically interviewing, recruiting participants or co-researchers or friends, however we wish to call them. That gets lost in it sometimes. Right. There is, and for the benefit, any number of benefits, including allowing us to get outside of ourselves. Not situating an autoethnographer as this autonomous subject, but rather someone who is immersed in a relational world, right, of intersubjectivity and what that can do and how that could complicate life and the representation of the stories and the analysis of the stories. So I wanted to put that piece in there too. So that's how I see it, and also currently it is. And it's bizarre to me because most often interviewing research, I think, still requires an expedited process. An interview process is not considered exempt. But when we put it in this larger kind of umbrella area, it doesn't require an expedited review. It's kind of interesting. So I look forward to hearing what others think and do at their places.
I see a hand. Is it Deepak?
Yeah. Hi. I'm so pleased that you asked this question because, I mean, I'm now part-time, but I'm in my fieldwork season, shall we say? So I would ordinarily, if I was still full-time, I'd be in my second year, and I'm in fieldwork. But I mean, I've been having supervisions for a while now, and every time since the start of my project, which is my own design and funding and everything has been off my own back with very little in terms of institutional guidance. But at the very start, I expressed that my desire to have autoethnography as a fundamental part of my research project. But when it comes to discussions and supervisions, it falls on just the mere mention of autoethnography. I can see palpable discomfort. And when I try to engage with that discomfort to try to understand where it's coming from or what feelings it's bringing, I'm left with silence. And that, for me, suggests that the way that I interpret is that actually autoethnography is not actually being supported in a way that I would like to see, in the sense that if there is silence and there is no engagement, even though I tenaciously ask for discussion, it still falls on, oh, I don't know, or oh, it's a gray area, this euphemistic kind of response. Then for me, that is worrying, in the sense that there is little response or little support. So I'm so pleased that you've expressed the question in a way that illuminates the discomfort that I've noticed in my supervisions for a while. As I say, I'm in my 4th year, but I'm part-time now, so it's technically 2nd. But yeah, it's almost like my autoethnography is it could indeed be a research project in itself, in the sense that I could do a research project on the discomforts of autoethnography in a PhD project. And I wonder if it is because I'm working with the police and my work is seen as being institutionalized, or for whatever reason, or that it needs to be more professional, in the sense that there is the potential for liability with the police, whatever it may be. But it's there when there is disconnection and an unwillingness to discuss, then that leaves me feeling a little bit, the alarm bells start to ring, which is why in previous workshops, in this conference, people have said you need to find your own people. And for me, being here and in conferences on autoethnography is where I find my own people, where I get the supervision on autoethnography that I would love to have one day, perhaps, in my PhD. And as I say, I'm almost halfway through, so there is 50% of the time. So that clock is diminishing now. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you're having that kind of struggle. I think I'll just offer a couple of thoughts. I mean, like you said, you have a community here. I wonder if it might be wise to bring someone in from outside to help, to offer some assistance. I think, it's fair. I can imagine what it would be like if someone put me on like a highly quantitative, dissertation committee, the kind of anxiety that I would probably have, and my maybe reluctance to contribute to a conversation. And I think it's fair to see it from that perspective, if in fact your members of your committee are not well versed in the method. It could just be that their anxiety is telling you something about their own preparation more than the method, right? As a possible, but be careful. You may not want to say that part. Okay, so and other thoughts about? I know the chat was. I haven't had a chance to look closely at the chat. I wonder if there are others about specifically the issue of research. Let's see. I'm going to come back. Maybe Keith, you can take a look and see if there's anything that's linked to that. And then, because I'm just in the few that I've seen, they're about some other ethical kinds of.
That's my
dilemmas and
read too, but I'll
questions.
take another look.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And then you can let me know. You can signal me.
Go for
Okay,
it.
so I think one of the things that to just think about is to have that consultation with the IRB. I think I think there are lots of narratives out there about the evil IRB, and I think there are instances when IRBs or ethics committees can have malintent, or they can be misinformed, and I know Carol's it was in the chat mentioning this, Carol Rambo, and very well known. If you're not familiar with her story, please take a look. But I think so there are definitely times when it's problematic to go, you're better off maybe talking to your advisor, someone who's already built into the institution, well versed in the institution, who can give you counsel. But I think what you don't want to have happen is a situation where you pursue a project and then you are penalized later, or you are barred from doing scholarship or research because you did not consult with your IRB. That is, I think, worse than having to retool a project or something. And so I would just say, consider them if you can, in a kind of consulting capacity, and then make a decision about how to proceed from there. So that would be one of my default recommendations for your ethics committees and so on. Okay, another sticky situation, and I think Keith perhaps touched on this a little bit. And so in addition to this question about research is, I think, a question about who is a participant and what counts, and at what point does someone rise to the standard or the threshold of a participant. And so I think there's some things to consider in this. And I'm going to talk later about strategies for doing this, but I want to just put out there in your brains this idea: how frequently does someone appear in the text? How frequently do they come up? Are they like a grocery store clerk that you just, you want to mention because you had a interesting interaction with them, or are they somebody that is frequently present in the story, in the narrative, in the performance? The other thing is how much, and what is the depth of the conversation about that other person. So you're going to see I'm talking about the other. We're going to talk about other first, and then we'll get to the self as we go. So how much, right? How much are they there? How deep is their, what are you saying about that person? What are you revealing about them? Maybe if it's something very surface, if you were to say, yes, I met this person named Jillian at a conference. She likes to cut it close when she goes to the airport, and she's very tall and has curly hair. I would probably, it's very surface, right? It's not something probably that would rise to participant. Okay. But if you dated me for, 6 years, you might want to, which, by the way, for the record, Keith and I have never dated, but if you had dated me for 6 years, maybe you would want to consider me as a participant in this project. Okay. So not everyone we write about is a participant, is part of what I guess my takeaway is there. Are you revealing something about that person that may be humiliating or could be detrimental to them, right? If I'm revealing that someone is an alcoholic, and there's a possibility that is not known to, or they're drinking as they're driving home from work or something, or their criminal activities, those are things that we may want to be considering in terms of how this person is involved in the project. And then we talk, I mentioned earlier, minimizing harm and then maximizing benefit. And I think this can be, I don't know, I always wonder, are there any benefits to anybody that I've ever done research with, really? I think I have done my most due diligence around minimizing harm, but I always feel like I often am getting more, I've worked with hospice patients, I'm getting more from them than I could ever give to them, right? But this is something for us to be considering. If you do decide that you are someone that you're working with is a participant, I fall back on Ellis and Etherington, their concepts of process consent and also ethics of consequence. And so process consent is this idea, and I think this is true whether you're doing autoethnography or not. If you're doing any kind of long-term project, you probably need to be thinking about the ethics over time, right? And if the project changes or evolves, you probably want to be informing that person, making sure they're still invested in the project, still willing to be a participant. And then I think the ethics of consequence are really, really important especially if you're working with institutions or organizations, not just with people. What are the consequences if I'm working with a hospice organization and I have critique that I want to talk about something that isn't working well in the organization, the community. For me, it's communication, right? On a team, for example. And are they aware of the consequences if they participate? And if I can, yes, I will give you, a pseudonym and protect your identity as best I can, but do they really understand the consequences of that? And many, many people don't understand research. I'm sure if you're like me, my parents, not PhDs, not academics, when I talk about what I do, I think, like sometimes it goes over their heads in terms of what the ramifications of their presence might be in a project. And I think we should not assume that even high level organizations or institutions understand the consequences of research and publication or presentation of that work. Okay. So this leads me, Keith, did you want to just checking in?
Yeah, good. We're good.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So this leads me to the notion of like protecting identities, and pseudonyms are very commonplace, right? Giving someone a fake name. I just volunteered for a project, and the person's already asking me before I even have done an interview what I want my pseudonym to be, and I don't even know really fully what the project, how it will look, but they're already asking me what I want my name to be. That's pretty common for people and places, right? But in autoethnography, we might do things like have composite characters. I might collapse multiple people into one, right? And to offer, and then also have a pseudonym for that person. I may do things there may just be ways in which I talk about people that are designed, right, to throw you off the trail if for some reason you wanted to like start Googling or something, right? I mean, we have to think about these things for sure. I think there are also times like I wonder if, what should we be keeping secret? I mean, I think some of you I know have will write about or have written about things that maybe shouldn't be couched in secrecy, right? Maybe they shouldn't be couched in secrecy. And and I don't we can talk about maybe what those things look like, but I think what we can't ignore is that we have power. We have some power, right? And Tony Adams talks about, narrative privilege, this idea that once we start doing the writing process, we may have been in a powerless position at one time. We may even be writing a story that highlights the ways in which we were in a one down kind of powerless position, but perhaps how we write, what we write, and how we write it may put us in a position of power. It may become the narrative of record if it's in print, right? So we have a type of power there too that I think we have to just be thinking about when we're writing about other people, when we're writing about and how we characterize those other people, right? And I can remember. Oh, sorry.
You want to finish your thought, because what you said made me think of something.
Yes, let me just say, I'll give one example, and then please, if you can hold. So when I was writing my dissertation, I'll just tell this story. I was writing my dissertation. I had visited a hospice patient. It was I think it was like a father and son, and they lived in a mobile home, like a modular home. And I remember I was trying to do some descriptive writing about the space. And even the ways in which I described the space, one of the things that Carolyn cautioned me about was this thinking about like, how am I characterizing the class distinctions? What kinds of assumptions? And so even the description of the space is a way in which I am putting a particular type of framing on this family that they may not describe themselves, right? So I have to be very, very careful about how to do that type of thing. Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
No, I love that about what gets masked or not, and that's an ongoing question for me. So your comment, Jillian, about the kept secrets, made me think of the question that came up from our group from Stefania about, do I have the right to write about personal family issues? And I mentioned that also here because I bet that's a common question. It often is, right? Mm-hmm. And it leads to the larger question, which is equally messy, right? Whose story is it? Right? Whose story is it?
Yeah.
Whose story is it to tell? And I think it's very flippant, and I would not suggest it as guidance at all, but it makes me think of the meme that gets passed around on social media, and I'm going to butcher it, but it says, if you don't want me to write about you, don't treat me poorly.
Yeah. I think Anne Lamott said that. I don't know if that's a quote attributed to her, but
yeah, whose story?
yes.
But, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I see a question Paul is saying, like, you can change all these details and nobody else would recognize them, but they may recognize themselves, right? And so what do you do in those situations? Yeah, okay, so I wish I had like an easy answer. I wish I had like this perfect solution to this question. And I feel like lots of ethics, it's never black. They want to make it black and white. It's never black and white. It's always gray. So I have, I mean, one possibility is that I have there, because there's two questions here. What do you do about how somebody might recognize themselves? And then there's the question of like, whose story is it to tell? And, what are you saying about them? Right. I mean, I think that I have one. So I did a member check in part of my dissertation, and a colleague of mine read a narrative that included her, and she did not like how I described the situation. But for me, it was 100% accurate, and it is a very uncomfortable. It's not an easy thing to do. It is the anxiety that you may have as you are waiting for someone to read your work and respond to it is very real. But I think pay attention to that anxiety, right? If I am worried about how I have described somebody, I probably need to change it, right? I probably need to change it. And if it's about someone's bad behavior, and you're still going to have them read, and in this case, this person wasn't even behaving badly. I just was describing their reaction, like a visceral reaction that they had to some bad news. And they didn't like, they said, was that really how I was, and I was like, yes, you were freaking out, like you were flipping out. Like, I was like, no, you were actually like that. And so I said, well, I asked them, how could I make this better? How could I change this, right? What would be better? How would you feel? Would you feel more comfortable? And eventually they just said, it's actually fine. It's actually fine. They just had to have the moment of like response, I think, and reaction to it. So I don't have like, so in that sense, like I would say, consider showing it to the person, or consider at least having a conversation with the person to tell them that you're writing about it. But obviously, if it's a negative situation, if this person was abusing you or something, it might not be wise to open up that door, right? And this is where I would say have a council of people that you can consult with to help you navigate that, because there isn't a clear, I wish I could give you like, here's the answer, but unfortunately there's no way, there's just no way around it, right? I've done this, give pseudonyms, change names, change locations, change occupations, and still the person can see themselves or know who I'm talking about because it was my ex-husband, right? I mean, of course you know who it is. So I don't have an easy answer for it, but I think to do the due diligence, to kind of follow those steps is the best you can, I think, hope for. I see a hand. Is it Sylvia?
Yes, it was me. I wanted to share when I wrote a book and I talked a lot about my family, particularly my ex-husband. And I remember I had a hard time going through what I said. It's a whole book, so I talk a lot about him. And I took things off and I had people read it, and it was a very complex decision. And I remember I read Anne Lamott, and I said, she's right. I have a right to my story, although I may talk about things that he may not like the way I say what happened. It happened to me, and I talk about that in the introduction. I said it's not what happened, but the way I understood what happened. And then once the book was published, I expected him and my kids to understand my side of the story. I thought it was going to be positive, and it was not very much for them. And then I read your article, which is translated in the book I published in Spanish, the article about ethics. And when we read your article, me and my students, it was like, there's nothing we can say. It seemed like it was so constrained that I freaked out. And then I've seen how people come and go about what I said. Like my daughter, she likes it and then she doesn't. And then she understands and then she doesn't. So it's a very complex process for the people who are involved. It must be very hard to read it first, but then it may make sense in the long run. So I think it's very hard. It seems like it would be easy, as you were saying, with people that are not that close, but with an ex-husband or your children, there's no way out.
Yeah, I think that's a really great observation about how people will engage the work and feel one way about it one time and then feel a different way another time. And I mean, we probably have that experience when we read back at some of our work, right? That we feel differently about it, over time. And I think, but I think you're also making me think to the question about whose story is it? You are telling your story. You're telling your from your perspective, and that has validity. And hey, if your ex-husband wants to write a book and tell his version, then there's a part of me that says then he's welcome to, right?
That's what I felt when I decided to go ahead. And Anne Lamott gave me the way to say it's my story. If I give it to him before I publish it, it won't be my story because it wouldn't be.
No, I think that's a really important observation too. Is you talk about like the chapter about ethics. It's like I don't want to constrain people, right? But that's not my goal.
But
not my goal at all.
I can understand how we need to be very careful.
Yeah. But how do you map? How do you map the terrain? I had Stacey Holman Jones's voice in my head when I was writing, because one of the things that she told me years and years ago is like you have to put boundaries around the thing, right? And so in order to like give good wisdom and advice, you try to put some boundaries, and then hope that they give you some guidance, and then you have to work within the constraints. But yeah, that's a great example of the dilemma,
Jillian,
for sure.
I might have a few things to pull out here.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. First, I want to mark Carolyn Ellis's comment that some people might get upset to not be included in your stories. My sister keeps asking me when I'm going to write about her, which is lovely. And then I wanted to mark Carolyn Rambo. I'm still thinking about that keynote, by the way, which was lovely. Essentially, maybe Carol, you might want to speak to this, of basically asking what is harm, what constitutes harm, and I would imagine who decides that. More mess, right? But it's important, and I don't think that meta question often gets asked, to my experience.
I'll just say, I think this is a really good question. It's something that because I often am working with people who are really sick and dying, there are feelings. People cry. Like I have been in multiple spaces where people cry, and does that constitute harm? Like, because if I was just merely present there, do I have to report that to my ethics committee as a type of diverse? What are they? Not diverse. It's called some type of event, and I can't think of the term. An adverse event is the word I was looking for. And does it count as an adverse event? And I would say no. I would say these are normal responses to a very emotional experience. Like, what does it say if people aren't crying in that space, right? But the IRB, the institutional, the ethical kinds of standards and principles that are laid out, and the definitions sometimes would lead me to think that my presence as a researcher somehow constituted an adverse event. So, hey, if my ex-husband were to read something, that wouldn't work. If Sylvia's ex-husband reads something about her, about their life together, and he's angry, maybe that's a reasonable response. Maybe that isn't harm. Maybe it's the appropriate reaction. So I think there's also something here about emotions, in particular, that almost never get addressed, which is why I think it was impressive when Sandra earlier said, they asked me about my well-being, right? Because nobody's having that kind of conversation. I haven't heard it any place about, well, what does harm actually look like for human subjects, or in this case, autoethnographic work. Yeah.
Which I imagine, just briefly, is inherently situated and political, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm, mhm.
it might not be of any shock to learn that we have some issues here in Florida, and out of a reason not to make students uncomfortable, in quotes,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
I think that relates in a way. What is harm?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's thinking back of Carol's comment.
yeah. No, and I think many of us educators also believe that sometimes the discomfort is where learning is most likely to happen. It's like, if I can shake you from your expectations, your norms, I can push you a little bit, give you a nudge, then I've done something. I've actually accomplished something. And I think that's also true in our writing. I think, in our performances, right?
I believe it was that precise reason why the lawsuit filed against Florida from the professor at USF and a student, it got a stay
Mm,
because it interrupted the opportunity for frank discussion and learning.
mm.
Paraphrasing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so I want to be mindful of time, and I do have something that I wanted us to try to do together. So, or work on. I want to do some application, right? So, okay, so I just will say a couple of things just really, really briefly. I mean, we were talking about this, we've talked a lot about the participant, and I want to spend a little bit of time at least talking about the self, right? And how to protect ourselves, because I think lots of people think, oh, autoethnography is so easy. You just write your story and it's done, right? But the truth is that most of us, I'm trying to think of a situation where it wouldn't be. You're making yourself vulnerable in ways that other methods they just don't. I mean, they pride themselves, right, on their ability to have distance, right, that the method itself keeps them separate from their participants. But in our case, we are the participants, it's people in our lives. We are the focus of the scholarship, right? So I think, there are ways in which we have to attend to the emotional elements. We have to attend to the professional consequences. I have students who I have them do a project that's related to food and nutrition in my health communication class. And I tell them, do not do this project if you have a history of disordered eating, or you have had some other trauma. I had a student, after the assignment was over, she had already turned in her paper, and I read the paper. She said, oh, I was in a war-torn country, and this reminds me of when I had to live on rations. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, why did you not say something to me first to allow me to give you an alternative? Because I don't want them to have self-injury as a result, right? I don't want them to have self-harm as a result of it, kind of exploring some of these issues. There may be other ways to do it. So I think we have to think about that for ourselves too. And I think in my experience, people really underestimate this. They really underestimate it. And oftentimes it is not until they could have even cried while they were doing the writing, and then they think they're fine. It's done. But it's that moment when they're standing up in front of an audience at a conference or in a classroom where suddenly the feelings are back. And again, I'm not saying the feelings are bad, but the student in this case is stunned by they feel the discomfort that they experience because their emotions have come up in a way that they weren't really prepared for. So I don't think we can underestimate this as an issue. And I'm not saying again that we should tell people don't do it, but they have to be prepared and know that it's a real possibility. The other thing to think about is that this is something, again, it is not limited to the writing process, and it maybe isn't even it isn't even limited to the presentation or performance. You can publish something and it has an afterlife, right? I mean, communication people, we talk about this just in conversations about how communication has an afterlife, a conversation. You're thinking about it when you walk away. Oh, I wish I would have said this, especially if someone cuts you off, says something mean, you always think of something later. But we have the same idea when you publish something, and as Sylvia was talking about, right? Some people read it, they're exposed to it, and they have reactions to it. Now, I have, thankfully, one of my pieces, I get so much positive feedback that it has outweighed any negatives, but I have certainly had negative reactions to some of my work, and that's something I have to be, and it can come out of the blue. It's not like a conference where you can say, oh, I gave a presentation, I can expect feedback and it's done. No, it just happens. I just get an email in my inbox from somebody, about the project or the topic. And so it's just something to think about. Okay. People's memories are different. That's going to be an issue. How I remembered something, I mean, the number of times my mother says to me, I don't remember it that way, is, if I had a nickel, I would be a very wealthy woman. So even when doing those member checks and so on, it can be messy because memories are different. And so it's something to be thinking about. Okay. And the last thing I just want to say, I know I'm kind of whipping through this, but the last thing I just want to say is that, again, if you're having anxiety about writing about other people, about writing about yourself, really do a check. Really kind of sit with that. Like I say, do a body scan, right? If you're having anxiety, your heart is like, tapping out of your chest, your stomach is upset, you have a headache, I think really think about what that is. If there's reluctance, why? I think those are clues. If you have anxiety, what is it about? Try to get to the bottom of it, because this is it may indicate that this is not the right time, this is not the right place, this is not the right approach, how you're writing about it. Maybe it needs to be purely fiction. Maybe it shouldn't be, something that's autoethnographic, in hopes that you can have a little bit additional layer of protection. Okay, I'm pausing.
These are great. The thread seems to be pointing towards your care of self part, right? And
Yes.
in particular, that stood out, Elizabeth's, we move then perhaps from what is my story to tell to the danger of becoming stuck in the story. What does it mean to be stuck in the story? And then you have Sandra piggybacking too, and others.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is sometimes too where the literature can just be helpful to pull you out or to help you. Okay, what are other people saying, doing, thinking about this topic? And maybe that's that's your anchoring point, just to give you a little bit of, and Nick, my late friend Nick Trujillo used to say, we need sometimes some critical distance. We don't need to necessarily be writing about the thing like as it's happening or right now. And sometimes you just need to put it down and give yourself the space to have new insights about the experience. But maybe that's the flip side of the gosh, this story is in me and I can't not think about it. I can't not write about it. I want to get it out. But I think sometimes that distance can be very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. How's everybody doing? Everybody feeling okay? I just feel like I should check in. I feel like I've been talking a lot, so now I want to get you all doing some stuff. Okay. Everybody feeling okay? Yeah? Okay. All right, great. I'm surprised how much energy I have. I haven't had any coffee yet today, so I'm proud of myself. Okay, so we've kind of, as we've been going along, I've kind of been throwing out strategies for thinking about how to do this. We talked about things like composite characters and process consent. I just talked about like scanning your body to like think about, you know, how you're actually feeling about something. And so what I wanted to spend some time doing and have you do, and I think you can, I was thinking, first I was thinking, oh, I put you back into groups to do this, but I think this can be like an individual activity. And so I started thinking about how can we like apply this? How can we make it have a little bit of praxis today? So it's not just maybe us talking, which is fine. I love to talk. So, but I wanted to think about some application. So I'm gonna pop up a slide here that has the guiding principles on one side that we kind of talked about. And then it has a series of questions to ask yourself. And what you might do is you might actually sit down with a piece of paper, or you know, bring up your Google Doc or something, and have two columns. And on one side is the self, you, and on the other side is the others, or an other, or some imagined others on the other side, on your other column. Okay. And then you're going to ask yourself a series of questions and think about like, okay, how, like, just thinking about these questions, and then the second step will be to think about which strategies you might use to address some of these issues. Okay. And there's probably one on, I guess I did talk about it. There's one on this list. So I'll just go through them quickly. The one question that I saw recently that I thought was kind of interesting was asking ourselves really kind of a two-part question. What is this project about? So what is the project about? Then the second question is, whom is it about? Is it about you? Is it about the other person and what they did to you? Or the other people, what this institution is doing to you? Or is it really about you? Okay, so just like a kind of a thought experiment. And then there's another question about power and narrative privilege, about what risks there are. And so giving you a chance to kind of think about a project that you have in mind and thinking about how you would address these. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you, I don't know, maybe 8-10 minutes to kind of do this. You can just do it. It doesn't have to be something in depth, but I'm going to share the screen, and then give you that time to kind of work on it, and we'll see what kind of questions come up, and then it'll give me a chance to also look at the chat. Okay, I'm going to share. Okay. All right, everybody can see that? So you see you have the guiding principles on the left, and then things that you can ask yourself. And in that second column, that is things that you're asking yourself about yourself and about the others.
I have a question, Jillian. Could you
Yeah.
expand a little bit on the last 2 points in the right-hand column about the ethical frame or right with W to the other, and where can I engage the literature? I think with the other one.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think so. Stephen Andrew has written a little bit about ethics, and one of the things that he was saying in his book is that sometimes we should be writing to the other. So right, as if we were writing, we may be writing about them, but we are writing to them as a mechanism for how we mitigate some of those anxieties about talking about this other person or characterizing this other person. And I don't want to say show them in the best light, because sometimes we're not talking about people in their best light. But I think that's the kind of mindset. And maybe it's something like, you know, if I'm talking about my ex-husband, I don't have to pile on to make my point, for example, right? That maybe I can still, or maybe I can have some of the messiness of our relationship, but also talk about him as a person that had kindness, or that was, you know, right? So that I can think about writing about them as a whole person and writing towards this kind of ethical more ethical approach. Does that answer the question on that one? And then I think, where can I engage the literature? I think this is what I was saying earlier about sometimes when maybe the emotions are very intense, or we have certain type of anxiety, we're feeling a sense of vulnerability. Maybe that is an opportunity, like this is a place for me to engage the literature, to step outside, to step away a little bit, and maybe give myself some of that distance that would help me, kind of get over a particular hump in the emotional aspects of the experience. It's just it may not work. It's a strategy that I'm kind of throwing out there as a possibility. As I was thinking about this, like, okay, well, how do we, there's the imagined experience, and then it's like, how do we make this how do we apply this? And I think that's an opportunity there. I always, I think that this is probably something I got from Carolyn's project about like introspection, emotional introspection. And, I think those feelings, when you're taught to do ethnography, you're taught to attend to what you see and what you hear and what you might touch, or, if you're traveling and eating food, what you taste, but I don't know how much people talk to us about the emotions. And so I think and I always felt like when I was doing ethnographic, more like kind of traditional ethnographic work, that if I was having anxiety about going into a new home, or going into someone's bedside, right? What was that anxiety tapping into? And that might be a source. So I think using the literature as a space, like, okay, if I'm feeling something, or if I'm not sure about something, I'm trying to work through it, maybe the literature can help me. Other autoethnographers can help me. And that's the kind of thinking I'm having around that.
Remind myself to
Oh,
unmute.
there you are.
I'm really enjoying the session. It's reminding me of a student I had who was writing about very difficult relationships with her parents through her childhood. And at the same time, yeah, as you just said, they were real people, and they'd had the upbringings they'd had. And so we worked out a way that didn't detract from the story that she was wanting to tell in the body of her dissertation, but she added an epilogue. We called it an epilogue. We don't want it to call it an appendice. It was more important than that. And she called it an epilogue, and she told the story of both her, in a very shortened form, obviously, of both her mother's upbringing and her father's upbringing, which gave context to why they were the way they were to her. And I think that was really, when we kind of landed on that, the way of doing it, I think it was really important to her to do that. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great strategy. And I'm going to just be perfectly honest. There are, I feel like, I'll just speak for myself, like, depending on the time, if you would have caught me like post-divorce to present, there are times when I don't want to say something nice. I don't want to be nice towards, people who have hurt me, my ex-husband. Like, I don't want to do that, but I realize that is more representative and it's more gracious, right? And that maybe there's nothing wrong with offering some great. Now, this is, again, I was not abused by this person. I'm not talking like, there are some times when there is no grace to be offered to a person there. I'm fully acknowledging that. But I think there are times when we are thinking about we're thinking about other people who have harmed us in particular, that it is valuable. And perhaps, like you're saying to your student, to have thought about her father as a person that also was a child at one time. Yeah, I think it's an important exercise, even if we're kicking and screaming when we have to do it. Yeah.
She wanted to.
Yeah, good.
There was something about, if anyone read this, she wanted them to recognize the intergenerational trauma that had gone on, and it was how to incorporate that. Yeah.
Thank you. I was looking at some of the comments and I've been trying to scroll through and look at some of the comments in the chat. But there was one comment I saw about one of the participants said they were from Ghana. Where did that one go? Sorry, I wanted to identify the person. mentioning that they were in Ghana and like how emotional writing is not normal, not typical, right? And you were saying just the idea of writing in this form has been challenging. Did you want to say something more about that? I think that's a really, as a person who's likes to describe myself as having a cold black heart, I too have anxiety about my feelings. Did you want to say more or?
No, thank you. I think I wrote that in relation to the aspect of harm and even how and well-being, as Sandra had also mentioned, right? Even how writing in this form also stirs up a lot of anxiety for me to begin with, because culturally, I am not used to that level of opening up my life and talking openly. And I speak as a caregiver. I have a child living with a blood disorder. And most of the time, and especially being in this space, and I'm referring to the United States, I have benefited a lot from people's stories. And so also as an up and coming qualitative scholar, I have seen the value of reciprocity in the form of storytelling and sharing and vulnerability. And I've also seen how that can also push forward resilience for myself and my students or my peer mentees. You know, so when you find yourself with all of this and you want to give back because you've received so much, but then at the same time, culturally, I also had the same question about who owns the narrative. When I want to talk about my life as an African woman who has a daughter with a blood disorder, and my life as a caregiver and my intersectionality in seeking self-discovery, do I ask my daughter? Do I ask my husband, my son? And I was sharing in our small group, how even the first time I spoke about it, my husband he didn't say anything, but I realized he knew of it and he wasn't happy about it. But then I was thinking probably, it was my sharing that everybody gets to know you have a child with sickle cell disease. If I hadn't said that, it wouldn't have been open. So as we're talking about harm, I'm also thinking how well-being versus harm, how are we conceptualizing these two, realities for us as scholars, but first and foremost as human beings dealing with social and cultural realities, and intersectionalities. Thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that too. Yeah, I think, you're making me think about how when people are, this is going to sound like an extreme example, and I hope it will make some sense, but I think about when people are really ill, we're really sick, and dying is on the horizon. There's oftentimes like thinking about, just for example, you and your husband and your different reactions to someone, let's say a family member's dying, and that you might want to be talking about it and you want to process it and you want to be present with that person. And then here's your partner going, I think we should give them their privacy right now. And you're pulling your hair out, right? Because you have this need that is in contradiction to, right? Maybe what is his need for privacy and confidentiality. And so I think it is a challenging terrain to navigate. And it's always a question for me is always, how can you honor and respect what his needs are, but also have your needs met, right? And also, in your case, you want to contribute to our knowledge and our understanding of what this experience is like. And that has value even beyond, right? I'm guessing that would be your orientation, is that, it would be valuable for other women, right, who have a daughter that is going through this particular illness. And so how do you share that experience with others that allows you to offer benefits and have the values and the catharsis of that experience, right? Yeah, it's something that may have to just be navigated and negotiated and worked through, like, right? It's not a one-time event. Yeah, it's you having this conversation perhaps with your husband or your children. Maybe it happens over time and it's a series of conversations. Yeah. He'll come, maybe he'll come around.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think it goes back to Sylvia's comment, because even that negotiation can hold back the opportunity. Right. So if they're not willing to be reasonable, or even allow you to be liberated in sharing, then you never get the opportunity to share. So then it goes back again to that question, harm for who? Or then it becomes, even for me as an African woman, also it becomes a question of male dominance and patriarchy and all of that. Then all those layers come into play: oppression, power dynamics. But probably it's just that conversation that two adults are not willing to have.
Yeah.
And
you may find this may be one of those things, and it applies to other people. And like in doing that application activity, it might mean that you realize that what you're writing, you're not writing about a whom, you're not writing about a person, you're writing about maybe these structures, right? That make people feel that they can't talk about illness publicly, right? That's a structure, a norm, right? You may be talking about patriarchy, you may be talking about cultural values, and that's the about question. Like, what are you writing about? And it may be, yes, you are at the center of that, and you are that person that's at the center, but it's really more about those elements than it is about the person. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I see I'm looking at the chat here. Seeing if there are other questions or things that maybe I didn't cover that you would like, or a question, something that I didn't cover that you were thinking you were going to get out of the session. Or I'm trying to be, mindful. We have, I think, 4 minutes, if my clock is correct, and I want to be mindful of time. I know this is the last day. Some of you are probably worn out, tired. Looks like it was, I went to a couple sessions yesterday. It looked great, what I saw. But are there other things that I can? Otherwise, I just
want to thank you for, I think you have a very wise and compassionate approach to ethics that I've always adored, even in this moment where you're talking about the grace that that we should offer folks, and the moments where we shouldn't. I mean, that in and of itself is, sometimes there's no, you did very bad things, and I'm going to call you out, and you deserve to be challenged, versus others trying to check ourselves. And I think that's when do they exist? Somebody might be a monster in my mind, but they probably aren't a monster in their mind.
No, it's it's definitely, thank you, I appreciate that. It's definitely that they're good questions just to ask ourselves, even if we don't, I can't give like a pat answer about it. And I think I'll just say that
you have a great chat. You have a great chat.
Oh,
question.
Yes. Okay.
Can you go back to your beginning? I'm a reluctant
autoethnographer. Okay, I will. Okay, so that'll be probably a good way to end. So I want to say one thing, as you all were in your kind of doing your independent work. I do think that autoethnographers are often held to a much higher ethical standard. It's higher than even journalists are held to in some cases, right? And so I want to just be cognizant of that and acknowledge that, is that sometimes we are held to, and sometimes we hold ourselves to a much higher standard than documentarians, than journalists, and so on, right? And so I want to just acknowledge that. I think on one hand, I think it's great. I think that's what we should be doing. On the other hand, I realize that it creates a lot of challenges sometimes for us to tell certain types of stories. And here we are grappling with the question of even like, whose story is it to tell, right? I mean, and there's a part of me that wants to say, well, it's my story and it's your story, damn it, and like, why are we having to constantly, ask this kind of question? But what it makes me think about is like, maybe it's now is a time to really start answering some of these questions that we started with at the beginning, whether or not this is research, and if it isn't, then what does that mean? And then what are the ethics that we think we should be bringing to bear on this particular approach and method? Why do we have to keep latching ourselves, right, to this other kind of ethic that is out there for behavioral sciences and human subjects? So it's just a thought, really. But I will say that I'm a reluctant autoethnographer because of many of the issues that we've discussed here today, right? I mean, I think maybe at one time when I was a more junior person, I was worried about it as a label, right? That it would somehow, I think, to a comment that Deepak made earlier about like his committee. I thankfully didn't have that problem during my doctoral studies, but I was very aware of what might happen outside of my institution once I got out there into the world. What has happened is that despite all of my reluctance, people still see me as an autoethnographer. So I think and it's a great, I'm glad to be part of this community, but it's not my go-to method either. So that's really what I mean so between the ethics and the kind of conundrums and dilemmas that we are confronted with when we do this work, that's one thing. But also it's not always my first thought. It's like, oh, this would be a great autoethnography. It's like maybe my second or third thought. And so I usually just say like, I'm a narrative ethnographer, or, I do reflexive ethnography. And that's usually how I describe myself. But, you ask my colleagues, they'll be like, Jillian's an autoethnographer. I get more requests to talk to grad students about autoethnography. I get more requests I'm working with a group of engineers to do collaborative autoethnography. So I'm in it, I don't know if that answers the question, but it's definitely these challenges that make it messy and beautiful and wonderful. And
yeah, and your reluctance stresses and underscores a certain mindfulness that I think you bring to your work, and that we bring to it, and that we all can. And to echo Tony's on, I just think it's, I texted him during it, I'm like, this is perfect. Actually, I texted both of you. And it is your dual kind of standpoint, or multiple standpoint, methodologically, and the meta theory and stuff, in and out. And it's, I bet folks really appreciated the path you took us on for those reasons and more. So thank you, Jillian Tullis. What a great workshop. Lots of resources in the chat. Okay, Jillian, you might check when you have a second. There's a request for a couple citations.
Yes. Okay.
At some
and
point.
And people can email me. Please email me if I didn't get to your question, or you have thoughts, or I can be helpful. Please feel free to email me.